The air inside the courtroom was so heavy it felt like stone pressing against every chest, every throat. It's not a whisper, not a shuffle, just silence as if the walls themselves were listening. Then, from the second row, Malcolm's sister rose. Her steps were unsteady, her hands trembling, but her eyes burned with a fire that grief alone could not forge. She clutched a small, weathered USB drive. Her fingers wrapped around it as if it were a lifeline, as if the very weight of her brother's soul rested inside. For a moment she closed her eyes, and then her voice cracked, but unwavering, split the silence. My brother's death was no accident. He was silenced. He was murdered because he knew the truth. The words hung in the air like smoke. People shifted in their seats. Reporters froze mid-scribble. And even the judge leaned forward, startled out of the rhythm of procedure. Defense snapped to life. Lawyers leaping to object, their voices frantic, desperate. But the sister raised the USB like a torch. This, she declared, her voice rising, was the last thing Malcolm gave me. He told me, if anything happened, I must make sure the world saw what he saw, that his death would not erase his voice. The bailiff hesitated, glancing at me. The judge who nodded grimly. And then, with a drumbeat that no one could stop, the evidence was plugged in. The sterile white walls of the courtroom flickered with light as the screens roared to life. Files appeared, mails, contracts, recordings. At first, the images were scattered, a blur of documents. Soon patterns emerged. Signatures of powerful men, timelines of cover-ups, blacklists with names that sent gasps rippling through the room. Jurors leaned closer, their eyes wide, faces pale. The reporters' pens raced again, their hands shook. For years, rumors had circled. Whispers swept under carpets now. The proof was undeniable. A collective chill spread through the chamber, and then came the moment no one expected. Her hand trembling, her breath ragged, Malcolm's sister lifted her arm and pointed across the room. Her voice cracked. The man behind all this sits right here, Bill Cosby. A roar erupted, gasps, shouts, even a muffled scream. Cameras snapped like gunfire. The defense scrambled to contain the explosion, shouting objections, demanding order, but before the storm could settle, the screen shifted again and Malcolm himself appeared. His face, tired and resolute, filled the courtroom. His voice, recorded in a quiet room weeks before his death, carried like a sermon. If you are watching this, I am already gone, but I refuse to be erased. Propped up with money, with power, with silence, they thought I would break. They thought I would give in, but I will not. I will never. The courtroom froze. It was as if the dead had risen to speak, his voice echoing against the walls with an authority no living lawyer could match. People in the gallery covered their mouths. Jurors shifted uneasily in their seats, and even the judge's gavel rested. Idle. Cosby's lawyers shouted over the playback, but their words were drowned out by the voice of a man who had already paid with his life. One by one, more files opened, recordings of phone calls, leaked memos, photographs, signed deals buried. In back channels, with every new slide, the defense wilted, their power bleeding out before the world's eyes. It was no longer a trial. It was revelation. And outside, the fire was already spreading. Crowds had gathered, at first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Words spilled through phones and screens, social media erupting like a tidal wave. Hashtags surged to the top of global trends. Hashtag justice for Malcolm. Hashtag truth will not die. Hashtag the empire falls. Chants rose, echoing against courthouse walls, growing so loud. They seeped into the chamber itself. Justice for Malcolm. Justice for Malcolm. Inside, the pressure built to a breaking point. What began as a defense of one man had shifted into the trial of an entire system, reckoning no one could stop. Cosby, once untouchable, sat stone-faced, his empire of silence, collapsing as the evidence stacked higher and higher. Every revelation was another crack in the armor, another piece of rot exposed to daylight. Through it all, Malcolm's sister stood rooted, tears streaming. Her grief transformed into something harder, sharper. She Cosby, not at the jury, but at the camera lenses trained on her, knowing the world was watching. Her voice shook but carried across the chaos. They thought killing him would bury the truth. They thought they could erase his voice, but hear me now. His voice is louder in death than it ever was in life. And today the world finally hears him. The room erupted, some in sobs, some in cheers, some in stunned silence. The trial was no longer a trial. It was the spark of a revolution. Malcolm's name, once whispered in grief, had become the rallying cry shouted across streets, across timelines, across the globe. And in that moment, his death was no longer a silence. It was an awakening. The air inside the courtroom was so heavy it felt like stone pressing against every chest, every throat. Not a whisper, not a shout, just silence as if the walls themselves were listening. Then, in the second row, Malcolm's sister rose. Her steps were unsteady, her hands trembling, her eyes burned with fire that grief alone could not forge. She clutched a small, weathered USB drive. Her fingers wrapped around it as if it were a lifeline, as if the very weight of her brother's soul rested inside. For a moment she closed her eyes, and then her voice cracked, but unwavering, split the silence. My brother's death was no accident. He was silenced. He was murdered because he knew the truth. The words hung in the air like smoke. People shifted in their seats. Reporters froze mid-scribble. And even the judge leaned forward, startled out of the rhythm of procedure. Defense snapped to life. Lawyers leaping to object, their voices frantic, desperate. But the sister raised the USB like a torch. This, she declared, her voice rising, was the last thing Malcolm gave me. He told me, if anything happened, I must make sure the world saw what he saw, that his death would not erase his voice. The bailiff hesitated, glancing at the judge who nodded grimly. And then, like a drumbeat that no one could stop, the evidence was plugged in. The sterile white walls of the courtroom flickered with light as the screens roared to life. Files appeared, mails, contracts, recordings. At first, the images were scattered, a blur of documents. Soon patterns emerged. Signatures of powerful men, timelines of cover-ups, blacklists with names that sent gasps rippling through the room. Jurors leaned closer, their eyes wide, their faces pale. The reporters' pens raced again, but their hands shook. For years, rumors had circled. Whispers swept under carpets now. The proof was undeniable. A collective chill spread through the chamber, and then came the moment no one expected. Her hand trembling, her breath ragged, Malcolm's sister lifted her arm and pointed across the room. Her voice cracked